You are in for an interesting ride.
This is where the whole thing started in 2003 when Alan Hayday and I and Mr. Parker were walking along this road and through what I call was the Grove, taking them down to the Pantiles, and Alan said, "A grove? That normally detects an ancient burial site." He said, "I'd like to look at this." So the following week was the 300th anniversary of the Grove, so 2003. So he came down and it was pouring with rain, it was absolutely teeming down. He left the tent where all the history, there was a lot of civic society people there and councillors and things like that. And he went out and about on his own and he came back about half an hour later. He says, "I found something absolutely amazing." He says, "I've never found this." He says, "As a member of the BSD water divining group," he says, "I think I found a whole load of burials that are in the shape of an arrow pointing." So he said, "I'd like to come down next Wednesday and do this in greater detail with more equipment." So the following Wednesday he came down. He said, "Have you ever done any work like this before?" I said, "No." He had the Rosetta disc, and the Rosetta disc are mind sensory colours that the priest Mager invented, and most diviners know about this. They call it the Rosetta disc as well.
I was asked to come to Tunbridge Wells a few years ago by Peter because he knew that I am in fact a dowser, and he had an idea that there might be something in the Grove. I was a bit sceptical, but in any case we went over there, and within about 20 minutes I started picking up rows of bodies, all aligned north-south in neat rows. That's what struck me. They're all in neat rows, not higgledy-piggledy. And it took several seconds to plot it all out. It came up as the shape of an arrow, and not just any old arrow. It was a very precise, artistic arrow. And I and Peter have drawings of this made to show that this was a deliberate arrow, as we say, arrowhead burial, or possibly a spearhead. So in any case, it has a point to it, and Peter discovered that the tip of the point is in fact a high status female, because she has artefacts buried with her. These are definitely not Christian burials. They are probably only about 18 inches below the ground. We also involved the Kent Archaeological Society to come down and do a geophys, which the council agreed. This involved a resistivity survey. We have the report from them to show that there is definitely something there, not just a bit of old ground. We were not allowed to do a dig, and neither were the Archaeological Society. No archaeology seems to go on in this town. As far as we can see, no official archaeology. It seems to be actively discouraged for some reason. So it's obvious the council have got absolutely no interest in heritage or archaeology, or unlike any other town I've come across, who normally have a museum and normally are interested in having finds from people in the local area.
So he lent me a pair of rods, and he said, "Have a go." He said, "If you hold black and yellow, it picks up bone in the ground." And I found I had no problem in handling this at all. So after he jotted down his notes and done the design and went back to London, I thought to myself, well, he says that you can use colour. White will sense spirituality and anything that humans invent. Red finds electric cables, black and yellow finds bone in the ground. I thought, well, why on earth would anybody, thousands of years ago, want to lay this out? They must have been trying to tell you something. So being a bit of an artist, and I've got 2 pictures in the National Collection, Your Art, one in St Pauls Cathedral and another at the Naval College at Dartmouth. So basically I got my paint box out and started to experiment in mind by putting my mindset into the mind of an ancient tribal person who wanted to lay this out. So I thought, well, it might be something spiritual, so I'd start with white. The next thing was the value. The most valuable thing I could think of was gold. The next thing is, well, if it was something from space, like a meteorite that they thought was one of the chariots of the gods or something like that. But first of all, I had to find something that was radioactive enough to respond against a colour. And I found I had a little alarm clock with a luminous dial. You know, orange responded on that. I had orange, white and gold. So I painted that up, and Alan said, oh, you can use these colours over maps and photographs. So I got a map of our town and started with the Grove and to the other side of the valley and found something quite interesting. I phoned Alan up, said I'll come down next Wednesday, and he had a look at this and he said, you have found something. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to say that we found a response of the arrow pointing to Wellington Rocks, which in fact it does. In the meantime, I'd honed in on this and I said, is there any such a thing as alien life? Because if it was orange, something from space, so I thought, well, is there such a thing as alien life? And I got a response, yes. So I said, could I have the colours, please? So holding this set of colours, my rod, he flew round towards this object. It gave me a particular set of 5 colours, which I then painted up and went over the maps. I actually got response in the Grove, in front of that arrowhead burial, of something that was most interesting. They were forms laid out as if they were burials, but not the same as the burials in the arrowhead at all. I went over other maps of the world just out of sheer interest. I went to the Great Pyramids in Egypt and Giza, and I found these graves also. This colour was also responding along the causeway and around the main pyramid.
So we're talking about burials of humans, and then burials of
something that's not human.
Okay.
So made up of completely different material, basically, that responds not with pink and white in it, but with red and pink, green and grey and silver. One of the interesting things is that many years later, when we discovered that all these colours had number values, we discovered that that was in actual fact a code for 42.
And 42 for you
is the meaning of life and everything in it that Douglas Adams came out with. And the thing is that it picks up all these burial sites around the world, and they leave things in arrow shapes to point you in certain directions of understanding.
So 42 is like the key that unlocks the information.
Yes, that's right. I home in on 42 and I ask it for the colours for whatever it is I'm examining or wanting to know about, and it provides me with the colours. And it was at least another 2 years before we realised that these colours all had power values in order. That's how we then knew it was 42, because before that we didn't know it was 42.
Yeah, the colours have numerical values.
Yes. I wrote to a leading museum in London in 2004 about this, and they were very interested, and they invited myself, Alan, and a gentleman called Roger, and all 3 of us were invited out, and we were tested. They said, we're very interested in how the ancients might have communicated or sensed things. So she said, we're going to blind test you. So she laid a map on the counter, and this was in the room full of ammonites and fossils and goodness knows what. She said, gold's been found in Cornwall. Can you tell us where in Cornwall on the map it's been found? And we all correctly found it on the beach. The next one was oil and gas has been discovered in Dorset. Have you any idea in Dorset where it has been? And I said, well, it's cheating a bit because we all know oil and gas is in Dorset, so but we all got the right position. But the third reason, and this is a real reason I feel they were asking, she said that she lived near a former Cold War missile silo for the defence of London, and it was now deactivated and just like a bomb site area. Could we identify on the map where it is? And we did. We picked it up on orange, also a uranium code which we had struck, because we realised that every time we were communicating with 42 sites or everything, it was always associated with uranium. So we had a uranium code, and then through 42 we found crop circle codes, which I discovered because I thought, well, how are we having any visitations that we don't know about? So I had the whole of the map of the UK out. And what I realised was that I was getting, against the crop circle code, over the UK, little areas that would respond on the map. So I would find 3 or 4 at a time spread out over the UK. So I then logged and timed them and then kept an eye on them, and I found that they would then disappear and that they would then appear somewhere else. So they were actually here and leaving us at night. Now, whether people realise this or not, and I only now realise they must have been in a sort of stealth dimension, but we were able to pick up the energy, you see, because we found that energy crosses the timeline barriers. I then found that this was happening all over the world. In the end, I said, could we have some sort of communication? Because they actually wanted to communicate more or less 24/7. So they said yes. So we struck an alphabet. And what is strange, we struck a 16-symbol alphabet based on our 26 letters, but in slightly warped shapes. Very strangely, the S is the same as the SS, Hitler's SS, which I think they were actually doing this as well, personally. I think other people know about this, but they keep it pretty quiet. But we'll come to the area where all this started now. We're entering the Grove, and basically our site will be over here on the left. Buckingham Road forms along there, and it was the Buckingham family that gave this to the people in 1703. Obviously they couldn't do anything with it because what they knew and probably haven't told a lot of other people about it historically wise.
And we are visiting the mound where we've done some work before, where there's been a craft found underneath.
My view is that the disc craft that's buried under here may have some relationship with the little grey bodies that we feel are buried in Bell Grove.
How lovely to have a sunny 18th of January 2022. Gosh, it's a pretty park, this, isn't it?
The next interesting session will be under that silver birch tree there. What's coming out of the end of our road to there.
Okay, well, that's another story.
Because it all links to the Grove, you see.
Tunbridge Wells and the Calverley grounds and surrounding environs are quite a mysterious place.
I'm Alan Hayday. We're now standing in a park in Tunbridge Wells known as the Grove, which is about 300 metres from the other park we were at, called Calverley Grounds Park. The reason we are here is to point out another ancient location which we discovered by dowsing in 2003. My friend Peter here, he thought there might be something in this park, I picked up by dowsing some regular movements on my rods which showed that there was something where we're standing. And we're standing actually on a burial ground, probably Bronze Age, of neat graves of 127 in fact, in the shape of an arrow.
You're telling me this is a very extensive arrow-shaped burial ground. How many metres across did you say it was?
It is approximately 35 metres across, a bit more in length I suppose, quite a large area.
Beyond the children's playground.
The children's area as well. Anyway, it took several sessions to work out what was going on here. Eventually I drew it out on a large piece of paper and sure enough came into an arrow shape. At that stage we thought there was 126 graves. We subsequently came back and discovered more graves, but significantly Peter here, by that time I taught him to douse, had discovered another grave at the tip of the arrow, just near enough where that sapling is there, who was a high status female, we believe. We believe she's high status because she has objects buried in her grave apart from herself, so she must be an important person. And the arrow is pointing exactly west and the graves are lying north-south, so they're not Christian graves, they're pagan, and they're probably, as I say, Bronze Age. The arrow is pointing across the valley where there is a stone formation known as Wellington Rocks, and that is approximately a mile from here. So
again, following on from the sapling over there.
Yeah, across the valley. That was something we had later discovered because we needed to know where the arrow was pointing to.
Working with these colour codes that Alan taught me, and here is one, as you can see. So pink and white denotes a male. If it was female, you'd add silver after the white, and then black and yellow determines that it's dead. If it's alive, you remove the black and yellow. And we found that there were perfect responses to the rods over this grave here. They actually cross quite strongly against these burials here. But in fact, if you added the silver, you picked up the single female grave by that new sapling over there. But beyond that, there were other graves that did not respond to these codes at all, but were laid again out in checker pattern formations. We found that that went against a completely different colour code, which we've discovered some years later when we realised that all these colours had number value, so that pink's 13, white is 7, black is 10, yellow is 5, but the colours over there, made up of 5 colours, added up to 42. We think that those determine the Neanderthal burials. So it's showing, possibly now, many years later after this discovery, that this was the male and the female interrelating with the Neanderthal for the modern human that we now know, because we've got Neanderthal in us. There seems to be a relation with another arrowhead burial called Belus Map, which is, instead of being in the ground like this, it's above the ground, and that's in a blunted arrow formation. So looking at the maps of that, I decided to do remote viewing, which is going over the maps with these colours, looking at the point of the arrow, and I discovered in the next field was again some 42 Neanderthal type burials in their own arrow shape, and they were pointing to a single female grave, so they were showing the same message but in a different direction, basically. So basically, if we go then to Wellington Rocks and look at the silhouette of Wellington Rocks, it slopes up, it's round. If you go on Google Earth, it's completely round with large blocks of sandstone. See, it comes from the ground level, sloping up gradually to the middle when it gets higher, and then you've got a lump on the top. Well, that's the classic flying saucer design.
So are you saying then that Neanderthal, the 42 code, then is partly extraterrestrial?
Yes, I think so, yes, because every single area we look at where 42 show up on the maps, particularly in Egypt with the Great Pyramids, you find that along the causeway we seem to get 42 burials.
And do you think then it's possible that these, let's call them Neanderthals, had craft?
Well, other research now being undertaken by the biolocation team seems to imply that they were highly intelligent and knew all about the values of pyramids and star systems.
What we believe was going on here happened maybe 8,500 years ago, back in the Bronze Age, as most archaeologists call it. And it seems there was interaction between the human population who were living here and alien visitors who mingled with them and interacted. As a result of this interaction, there seems to be a mixture of graves in this area of the town, and they seem to be laid out in a kind of chessboard pattern, rectangular, but they're definitely not human beings, because you need a different kind of dowsing technique to detect them, and you can't detect them with an ordinary bit of bone, unlike normal human beings. So we're pretty sure there's something very peculiar going on here. We haven't got to the bottom of it yet, and I'm going to hand you over to Peter.
We join Peter at home for another look at the Arrowhead burial, which discovery in 2003 indicates human and non-humans were buried there approximately 8,500 years ago.
A 1 in 500 scale map done in the late 1800s by the military. The top here is the Arrowhead burial with a pit at the front. The arrow is pointing across the common, but in front of the arrow, of course, are the 42 burials here.
Right, so there's the arrowhead.
Yeah.
That's clearly an arrow shape.
But at the time, we didn't realise these were here because we never had a 42 code. So we had no idea that any of these burials were here. All we did was to find something on the common. After we got the 42 code, we then realised we had these burials here. So the arrowhead was in fact pointing to a single female grave here, then pointing to a block of 42s here, and of course it was also pointing to the common. So the grove is vitally part of the common story. Now, an archaeological society came along and did a geophys on here, and they found the pit. But of course, these burials are about 8,000 years old. They are extremely old. So we're going back a great deal of time. And our Project Y site in Hawkenbury, we dated it around about 11,000 years, just after the Ice Age, basically.
Yeah. The Geophysical Survey Group pointed out the pit at the Arrow Point. This pit contains dowsable matching remains to the energy circle crash point debris.
In future episodes, we will tell you of the development of the hologram telescope through this colour sensory system and through dowsing, which allows you to draw down the whole solar system on a football pitch, as long as it's a flat surface, using rare earth metals and chemicals. You get the sun down, and then you can build the rest of the planets up in relation to the sun. Then you can walk through it and pick up UFOs in their droves coming in.
Meanwhile, back in Calverley grounds, we hear about the removal of some alien bodies back in the 1930s, which were discovered as air raid shelters were being dug out. This event was reported to Peter by someone who knew about it at the time.
Now at the east end of the Calverley grounds, and as you'll see, there is an embankment there, goes up to a tennis court and a croquet club, and there is another embankment to a higher level at the back. We had a very great friend who served in the Merchant Navy during the war, but prior to the war he was a special attached to the local police force. And also during the earlier part, before the war, there were air raid shelters being dug in this part in the top right hand corner over there. I had no interest in archaeology, but Harry, this great friend who also did babysitting for us, stated that when he was a special, whilst digging these air raid shelters, they came across a row of very strange graves. They weren't the normal sort of graves that you would expect to find, and it was the rumour of the police station. They were surreptitiously removed, we believe, to the paupers' graves in Hawkenbury Cemetery, and everything was hushed up. No paperwork was ever produced for this.
The following is a short clip from a field trip to Hawkenbury Crematorium, 21st February 2017, to see if we could find the location of the paupers' graves, which we did, and Peter found a response to the code indicating the burial of alien bodies, circa 1930. Peter, Vincent who's going to tell us an extraordinary story about a pauper's grave that we believe contains the remains of E.T.
The 42 code is responding under this, what is now a composting heap, but of course in the late 1930s this would have been a grassed area, as you can see, with these bushes have probably sprung up since as well. So we were remote sensing a response to these graves over in this corner of the crematorium, and basically this would be the paupers area at that time, and the information we had at that time was the fact that these graves were very strange to look at, and they were just cleared away quietly to basically this corner here. Rods are responding to this code, which is exactly the same code that we get elsewhere. Many years later, when Alan and I were interested in this as a subject matter, we tried to find out about paperwork. There was just nothing around at all. It's almost as if the event never happened. So although it's hearsay, there was no reason to have invented this because there was no purpose to do it then. It was an absolute bit of hot information that we remembered. But now, with other finds that have been found in this park since, it does all start to come together like a jigsaw puzzle.
Truly then, this is perhaps the only place in Great Britain where we know there were bodies that were clearly not human, buried quite deep, and they would have had to go deep down to do the air raid shelter.
I mean, these sort of things have been found. The actual arrowhead burial is here, or arrow-shaped burial. It's a pointer. It's like, this is the way to the toilet. So they're telling you something. So this area here encompasses that. And then what we found much, much later was a single female burial here, and then a whole load of 42s over here. But we also discovered that these 42s were in at least 3 different types. So you could say it's a different, let's say somebody who's from the northern hemisphere and somebody from the southern hemisphere. There's a slight difference in our pigmentation, things like that. So here we had some that were what we call half and half human, half that. I mean, a lot of people don't know what happened to Neanderthals. They intermarried. Interbred, but apparently, according to some of the latest programs on ancient archaeology, they think that within all of us there's some little alien matter left over from the masses of different types of breeding that's gone on over the world. But the thing is that we do have some half and halves, and later on I will show you some of this, because on a site that I have that's very, very secret, I have actually found 42 remains fossilized. And not only that, but they're actually in the dark grey clay colour. Well, over here, that determines about 160 million, or can be up to 160 million years in age, because the sandy yellow is about 20 million. And I've actually found remains, human remains, in the sandy yellow colour, but when I find 42, I find that they're in the dark grey colour. And the other thing too is I've actually got a half and half 42, half human, and that is more or less the sandy colour. So you can see the difference in age according to the deposits and the depth of the deposits. And what's happened is the sea has washed these out and washed them up, and people walk over these, they don't realise what they're walking over. And unless you have all this prehistory and understanding, you would never know.
Okay, Peter, so you're going to walk toward me now with the 42 code.
With the 42 code, and on the ground is a cast of a foot of a 42 with only what appear to be 3 toes. So there's probably one hidden further down some.
So we're looking at a fossilised remains of things not human.
No, they've arrived a long, long time ago, millions of years ago. They bred down here, they had a base down here, obviously, and they have then jigged around with humanity as we know it. They then left. The good book says that most things left about 6,000 years ago, but I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of them left about 11,000 years ago when they had a bit of a fight. Okay, right. Here we are. Here we know. Yeah.
So response on the 42.
Yeah.
Can we try that on a human code just to test that?
Yeah, yeah. I'll try it on a human female code because basically I don't want to interfere with the male burials that might be on the bottom.
Oh yeah,
I don't think there will be any. Just going to walk here. And there's no response there at all.
Oh, very
now,
interesting.
I'll do the male now.
That is fascinating.
Now, bearing in mind that the arrow should actually tapered off here, so there shouldn't really be any male burial below the ground because otherwise you'll interfere with that, you see. The thing about the colours is that they will do independent things. There we are. So there's no male burial there, just the 42 burial remains here as on the surface. Now, here's something interesting. With no male there and no female there, and female and male did not go against those 42 burial remains. However, this is having all the hallmarks of something that is half and half. So what I've got to do is to use both codes. One of the interesting things about this system is that if you have a lump of rock, for instance, and you think you've got gold in there, you think you've got nickel in there, you think you've got copper in there, you can have a code for gold, a code for silver, code for nickel, let's say a code for copper. But if, for instance, you had a code for iron in there, it would kill the whole lot stone dead because iron didn't exist. But the more codes you put together, the stronger the response. So in actual fact, if you were to hold 5 correct codes, you would have a tremendous response. Particularly on a pendulum action, it would spin around like a helicopter blade, you know. So let's have a look and see what's going on here now. Right, now that's crossing against 42, right? Okay. Now what is interesting, if I put a female grave with it, right? I must admit it's donkey's years since I've done this on this particular one. Look at that. It's a much stronger response as well. Now,
so this is a hybrid?
A hybrid, yeah, that's one of the hybrids I'm telling you. Now, if I put a male code with it, right, this tells you about the double check. Right. Don't forget, I'm not looking at these colours. It won't work, because the male has killed the response. It doesn't exist in there, only female.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, that's the double check on this system.
So that's a hybrid
That's
female.
a hybrid. That is part of what 42 bred with males. Now some people might say, oh, that's Neanderthal bearing with the modern humans as we're coming up. Maybe, but Neanderthals may well have a lifestyle that goes back millions of years, multiple millions of years, and not just the last one 40,000 years ago in Gibraltar. I think this was a much, much bigger picture. So this is where the point is. The pit was over there, and it expands out over there. There's 128 people, roughly, all male. So we later found that over here was the single female grave. So when we walked from the point over here, there's no graves here, you see, there's no response to a female. And then gradually, as you come over here, wallop, this comes round against the female code. And what I'm going to do is to show you the difference between the female code and the male code, because basically it shouldn't go against the male code at all. No response at all, see? So that one silver colour added allows the mind sensory computer system, which is really what it is, to ascertain from the magnetic signatures coming up from below the ground that this has pink, white, silver, black and yellow, and this is male, has no silver in it, so it doesn't respond. So that doesn't respond. So that arrow is pointing to the single female grave.
Now, is this a human female,
Yes,
Peter?
yes. So you've got human males there, human female here, but what is over there certainly isn't human as we understand. The burial's there. And sadly, this acidity in the soil here is destroying everything. So all you've got are stains left, but it doesn't matter whether it's solid bone, stain, it will be there forever. So as long as they haven't dug it out and put new soil in, the message will always be there. I'm now going to show you actually solid archaeological remains of what's over there. Very time consuming having all these different codes, and I'll show you what is meant by mind sensory codes in a minute. So here's a 42 code. Red, pink, grey, silver and green. This is type 42. You can see the deposits are quite grey. It's a bit of bone, fossilised bone. Basically, if I hold that, that should act instead of the colours. I can put it down on the ground or I can hold it. So basically, this is what it would look like with all the burials in pagan form going across, and we found that there was a pit in the front. This is the path going along here and Sutherland Road going down here. And every one of these is a male response, normal male, buried. Now they're telling you something because they've done it in this shape. And there's also a ley line going right the way through here and one going along each side. And over here, these are the later burials that we found having got the code, and then we found that these were sort of half and halves, and there were 3 different types there. So it's a question of the colours change according to the type.
We're just about to test the 42 burials over in this neck of the woods of the Grove, and that's the area where we've just been testing for the male burial and the arrowhead.
Oh, they're quite tame here. Afternoon. A lot of the reasons for these forms coming to Earth is A, we've got water, and B, we have a lot of minerals, and things like gold, vanadium, all these sort of things are wanted. Basically they would come here, and that's what qualified archaeologists and the Ancient Alien series have come to. It's interesting that these colours will work on anything. They'll work on the moon, they'll work on Mars, they'll work down here, and they'll work over maps. I'm now going to walk here, and that's 42, right? Come off of 42 and it opens up, and it doesn't want to cross over there because it's not 42. It's a different form.
Yeah, very
so we now have 2 alien forms here. If you've got human remains, then it won't respond to any of these 2, you see? So now I'm going to show you how this 42 response creeps out over here, because this is the 42 burial ground. So I'm going to hold the 42 code, the 42 material, and walk over here and see what happens. Don't forget, we're talking about thousands of years. Another one. 42's buried in the ground there as stain, whereas this is solid remains. So it comes out, opens up, and that's why you've got the different design on that map to determine the male human up there against the alien form here, and then further up there we've got responses to the half and halves. So in other words, the ancient tribes. Now I'm going to give you a clue as to what age we're talking about here. We all talk about Bronze Age and Iron Age, going back 4,000 or 5,000 years maybe, but I was introduced to a lady who worked for, well, the special branch. She retired but taught people what subjects, I'm not sure. I was telling her about this, so she had to come to the town. She said, I'll go and have a look. I won't tell you when I'm coming because I don't want to be influenced or anything, you see. So she came along because I told her I felt this was about 8,000 years old, and she came back and said, yes it is. I sat in there, it's about 8,500 years old. And she said, not only that, but you missed a lot. Now, what she was implying to, at that time, I hadn't cottoned onto the 42s here, or the single female grave. So, so she had got an awful lot, but there's even more in here, because there's a very interesting thing that happened down there in Bell Grove, and I haven't done this experiment myself. I want to try it out. This is a burial ground by the ancients of alien life forms, basically, and this was a very key area, and it was not affected by the Ice Age. It was in tundra. Most of the goings on would be underground like they are elsewhere in the world. So we'll come back and have a look at something now. So this is an experiment for me. Down there is something called Bell Grove. If you look at the German experiments during the war and what they think have been going on in America, they call something the Bell, and therefore Bell Grove. And we know that something crashed in this area because after I discovered this 42 code, I asked them if there was a crash site, And they said yes. So they actually pointed us to an area way out in the Hawkenbury direction. We found it and we called it Project Y.
We investigate in episode 2 the Belgrove area of the Grove. Meanwhile, it's tea time and we found Alan.